What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. Folks, we're back, and I know that everybody likes a good story about a small town boy that makes good, and I've got him here today. So Shaun Hayes was a small town boy from Thayer, Missouri, and he had a goal, and his goal was to be a millionaire. At the age of 29, he bought his first bank. He was a CEO of a large bank at 32, ran a public company at 35, sold the bank for $500 million at 44, and then something happened because his goal was to be a millionaire, and now here he was. What was he going to do? He lost direction. He got a 5-year prison sentence for bank fraud. Now he's making his comeback. He's got a new book that's coming out. It's called The Great Choice. He was nice enough to let me read that this weekend. It's a great book. It's coming out February 7th. So I'm not sure. I'll ask him about if you can pre-order or do those type of things. But he's doing some professional speaking, and, man, he's got a wealth of knowledge of all the different things that he's been through his journey. And on top of that, he spent some time with my old man at Marion Prison, and we'll probably get into that. We're going to unpack all this. Can't wait to get into it. Welcome, Shaun Hayes.
Thank you, Brent. I really appreciate this, and I have become a fan of your podcast in the last few days. And what's interesting is when you talk about your worst fears, and I wrote 2 dedications in the book, and the one we didn't choose was the saying, seldom in life do you reach your greatest dreams or do you realize your worst fears. But I can honestly say I've done both. So
You've done both, lived it both ways.
And I'm touched to be here, so thank you.
Well, I've been very, I really looking forward to this interview because, you know, there's so many stories that you share in your book, Shaun, that are life lessons. And, you know, can you walk us back a little bit, that boy growing up in Thayer, give us a little bit of flavor of what that was like.
Well, you know, it's interesting because it was I call it an SMSA of about 3,000 because the Arkansas state line was literally across the street. But, you know, my parents always gave you that feeling you could do anything. There was nothing in life you couldn't do if you put your mind to it. And so in a small town, there was nothing to do in those days but play sports.
Yeah.
And so when I look back in life, I had just some wonderful mentors that were teachers and coaches, and no one ever told you couldn't. Now, we weren't that good, but, you know, we had fun. And those early successes and the fact that you knew everyone. You couldn't go anywhere in a town like that.
How big was it? How big was
Thayer?
Thayer?
Well, Thayer was 2,000. And Mammoth Spring, Arkansas was about 1,000. That's why I called it the SMSA. But it was a great place to grow up and a great time. And I graduated high school in 78, so the late 60s and through the 70s. And it was
kind of the wonder years.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was a little bit of Mayberry, and but there, you know, we always talk about there wasn't any public destruction of property or anything because you knew everybody, and this is something that most people won't realize because I live in St. Louis, and now then I see deer carcasses on every highway in a lot of numbers. And where I was from, I told somebody a few weeks ago, I said you would never see that, and they said why? I said that was the red meat. Because deer season and then anything that happened, that's what people ate.
Sure.
And this gives you an idea. So that for Thayer, they would let the school kids hunt the week of deer season, the first week, if no property was damaged in any of the 3 schools during Halloween.
Incentive. Yeah. Got it.
But that's how small the town was.
No soapy, papery, nothing. Just you get to hunt next week if you don't hurt anything. I like that.
But I have to tell you one more small town story that you can relate to. So I was a freshman in Mizzou, and I met this beautiful Stevens girl from Wisconsin. And I said, write me a letter. And she goes, okay, what's your address? I said, you just write Shaun 65791 and I'll get it. And I did.
Is that crazy? Well, that's the benefit of being in a small town.
Yeah, it is. a wonderful place to grow up.
So tell me a little bit about your parents and siblings and how was that world?
Well, I had crazy parents.
Yeah.
They were depression children. My father's family lost everything, and my mother's family didn't know there was a depression. And literally, they didn't. And it's just one of those things where and they were like that, and had interesting war years. And my dad had a lot of siblings. My mom had none. So all these kind of things you get to grow up with aunts and uncles and with no one. Mm-hmm. But after the war, they moved basically from New York City to Thayer, Missouri.
Wow.
And mainly because they'd grown up about 100 miles away in two different small towns. And because of my grandfather's lumber business, it was a rails town. And so it was logical to go there.
That makes sense.
I have an older sister who's 13 years older. And so everybody in my family had gone to college. And I went to high school actually back to high school. And I didn't know you didn't go to college.
That was just what you knew.
Right. And knowing Springfield very well, my dad and my sister went to Drury, and my mom went to what's now, I guess, Missouri State. In those days, she called it
SMS,
Teachers College in her day.
Right.
But they were very entrepreneurial. They had a furniture store, a hardware store, a motel, a restaurant.
Do you think that, Shaun, I was reading that in your book, and the different things that they had, between the motel and the restaurant, did you see that and think, oh, okay, that's what I need to do is figure out how to go after a business, run a business, because you were brought up not knowing any different, I wouldn't think. I mean, your mom and dad just did that.
Right. Actually, there's about a 30-year-old study that was paid for by the Kauffman Foundation that looked at entrepreneurs, and they were trying to find what the telling thing.
Yeah, the common link.
And you'll get this because it fits you as well. In 1993 or 4, 70% of all entrepreneurs, fathers, did not get what they quoted as a regular paycheck. And that was the line. And I believe now it's father or mother because we're a much different world 30 years later.
Yeah.
And that's why my parents were. In fact,
interesting.
I went to Mizzou to undergraduate. You're going to laugh when you this. I didn't know how to cash a check.
Right.
I went to the bookstore and they said, and they told me what I had to do. So I called the bank. Because my checks had no account number, and I couldn't fill out the form. So I called the bank, and they said, Shaun, just make up some numbers.
Okay.
And that's what I did, was I wrote down some numbers.
You literally made out some numbers on the bottom of your check.
Well, no, and I did that, and I went over, and they said, well, cash your check. And that's what a small town's like. Very, very different. But they were interesting characters. They hated banks, and so I was actually a very big disappointment for not going to law school. I did go to law school. So
they hated banks, and then here you are. Yeah.
My dad said in those days at Boatman's Bank, the First National West Plains, which became a Centair Bank of America, they had so much faith in him he needed to borrow $52,000 in 1950 that they kept two, and the Boatman's National Bank of St. Louis lent him the other 50. And the other thing they did not like was the IRS.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that in the book, but we literally had 3 safes full of cash. The other reason why I never cashed a check was when you needed
cash.
money. Yeah.
Yeah.
He said, my mom had a few $1,000s in her shoes in her closet. Forget the safes. My dad always had a few thousand in his pocket. And so you needed money. Hey, I need some money. And then I was very industrious, and I always had some kind of, today the term is side hustle.
Yeah.
And in my day, it was just, you just hustled. You wanted to make money.
I think it's so, because you've got some stories in your book, and I thought one of them that was, and I think you kind of stayed in the business a little bit after that, but can you tell your fireworks story?
Well, it was the summer of 80, and I'd made a lot of money the year before in the hay baling business, but that was a year that diesel fuel went through the roof, baling twine, and there wasn't going to be money made. So I had been working at we'll call it a mall, that would be a generous thing in West Plains, and my cousin's wife's gift shop, which I wasn't getting paid, number one, and number two, I was about bored stiff, because a gift shop in a town of 5,000 doesn't do a lot. And my dad said, are you going to get a real job? And so I thought for about an hour and a half or two, and I said, wait a minute, Mr. Daw we have a volunteer fire department. He runs a huge fireworks thing in Thayer. People would come for 30, 40 miles away, Brent, to the fireworks. The fireworks after the baseball game. And since I always played baseball, I saw that. And for you all that don't realize, you had to go 80 miles to the nearest McDonald's. You had to go, we had one theater. Most people had to go 25 or more miles to a theater. Just give you a little perspective. So I called Mr. Daw up, and I told him who I was, and of course he knew. And I said, where do you get the fireworks? And he said, Arnold Fireworks. Well, in those days, you had information, so I dialed 1501 555 1212. I need the number for Arnold Fireworks. Got it. Turned around, dialed again. And a lady answered the phone. And I said, I would like to speak to the owner. And she goes, well, I am the owner. My husband died a few years ago. And I said, well, this is my name, and I'm in Thayer, Missouri, and I want to buy some fireworks. And she goes, we can do that. I said, well, there's a problem. I don't have any money. Can you consign them to me?
I love this.
Well, it gets better. So she says, of course I'll consign them to you. And I said, and she goes, and by the way, if you mail me a registered letter by the 6th of July with full payment, I'll give you an extra 2% off. So of course I did that.
Of course.
But we had one problem, Brent. It was after June 15th. It was like June 16th. She goes, you have to have your order in to where we can ship them to you before June 15th. You have to come and get them. Well, we had a lot of trucks. I said, no problem. By the way, this is a mantra for us entrepreneurs in life. I get in a truck and I drive to Little Rock and I load them up, and it rained all the way back. And I would stop under overpasses and just anything in the world. Well, because they were wet, I laid them out to where the boxes would dry up.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what to do. And I couldn't afford to shoot any.
Right.
I mean, I knew what firecrackers. I mean, there were certain things, bottle rockets, I knew what they were. But
you're not looking to get fireworks wet. That would be one of the things that you wouldn't want, right?
The one thing you don't want to do. Well, my dad had helped me build a stand. We had the first access off a limited access highway. We owned the building, but not the bar in it. So in this bar parking lot, I had a fireworks stand, but it was you couldn't sell fireworks in the city limits. Now, on the Arkansas side, there were fireworks stands because that was different. Mm-hmm. But still, they weren't in the city limits of Thayer. So then I went to the neighbors, and they let me put I hand-painted 4x8 sheets of plywood, discount fireworks ahead, put them on the side of the highway. And then, this is another thing, I don't even think you're old enough to remember one of these, Brent, a mimeograph machine.
Oh, wow.
My best friend's mother was a secretary at the school.
Yeah.
So I made up discount fireworks, bottle rockets, 99 cents. And then I went to every Saturday, I went to every supermarket for miles and stuffed them on the windshields. And all of a sudden, I'm in the fireworks business. But the story I know you're looking forward to, because I was an all-conference lineman, so I used to be a big kid. And the guy that ran the grocery store, he knew us well, because the things that you couldn't buy from the purveyors that sent a truck in once a week, you went to the grocery store. We went frequently. He stopped by, and he had a farm probably a couple miles north of my fireworks stand. And he pulled in his truck one evening. He said, I need to buy our fireworks. Well, he wanted this number 3 shell. Mm-hmm. Well, Brent, I had no clue what a number 3 shell was.
You were just selling fireworks.
I only had like 5 of them, so I sure wasn't going to test one. And it might be wet on top of that.
Exactly.
So he bought these things. Well, a couple of days later, he came back. It was still before the 4th of July. And he said, Shaun, I would whip your butt if you weren't so big. And I said, well, what's wrong, sir? He goes, well, last night we had the family over and the kids, and we had a great time shooting fireworks. And I saved that number 3 shell for the end. And he goes, I served in the military. He goes, that's a mortar round.
Oh, man.
Well, these cattle went through the fence, because cows will run through anything for y'all that don't live in the country.
Then they all follow each other.
Yeah. So they were chasing cattle till about 2 a.m. But it was a great thing because my fraternity brothers would get a job. In those days, minimum wage was $2.20. Mm-hmm. And I got it down to where those summers, and then after I got out of college, actually, I took my vacation. I could make $20,000, have a great suntan, and read a ton of books, because you're out there for 3 weeks, but the first 16, 17 days, you're really just working on your suntan and reading.
That's a good plan right there.
So that was my fireworks business.
Well, and you stayed in it for a little while, didn't you?
I did. When I got out of college, I went to work for UMB in Kansas City, and I only got 1 week vacation. So I called my cousin up. I said, hey, I got this fireworks stand. He's about 10 years older and far more entrepreneurial even than I am. And I said, Johnny, if you'll open it up for 2 weeks, I'll come down the week of the 4th type of vacation. Mm-hmm. And so we did. We split $20,000. We had
that's
10
awesome.
grand a piece. Yeah, it was just
good
fun.
money. Well, that's a lot of money back in. That's a lot of money, but there's a lot of money back in those days.
It was. Well, that's what put me in the loan sharking business.
Well, let's talk about that. So, University of Missouri is a big school, and anytime you go to college, there is that guy, and you were that guy. How did this happen?
Well, and by the way, I didn't, and this goes back to really a lot of my life. I've lived in the gray. I didn't know part of what I was doing was illegal. Mm-hmm. I first started out as I had a lot of wealthy fraternity brothers, mainly journalism students from all over the country, that would come to Mizzou, and they would come in. And in those days, you took dates to football games, and you wore suits and all kinds of. It was a whole different culture. And they'd come by on Friday and say, "Hey, Shaun, I need $200 for the weekend. I got a date tonight. I got this weekend." and I don't have any money. And I'd say, no problem. And I'd write them a check for $200, and they'd write me a check for $220, Brent.
There it is.
Now, I know this is where it got really fun. You can't do this anymore. And I didn't know what I was doing was illegal, actually, until a couple years later when I moved up in the business school. But I would run to the post office at night and put it in. The mail didn't go out till like 10 o'clock. And I'd mail it to our bank, which was in Mammoth Spring, Arkansas, across the state line. Well, it would get to Thayer like on Tuesday, they'd deposit it. Well, that kid would stuff in his pocket. He'd go to Eastgate Guy, IGA, cash a check for $100, get his cash. And then on Monday or Tuesday, he'd show up at the local bank and put my check in. Well, his check had cleared my bank. His parents' money would come in, and I was running, like a $20,000, $30,000 kite, making, $400, $500, $600 a week, And then I got industrious. We had there was a bookie out of St. Charles that's nephew was in our fraternity, and so we had a lot of statistics in those days in business school, and our guys thought they were really smart. They had one problem with their theory. They thought it was random. The problem was they weren't flipping a coin. And actually in prison, I proved this to your father. We'll come back to that in a second. They were picking the teams. Well, once you pick the teams, it's not random.
Sure.
So so in the weekly pool in Marion, your dad would pick the teams, and I'd take a coin, and we'd put heads, tails, and I would beat him every week.
On the flip.
On the flip, because the flip wins. Well, these guys would bet $100 on the noon, 1 o'clock college game. If they lost, they'd bet $200. In those days, you had to play a packed 8 game in the evening because you couldn't. The information didn't flow. If you lost, they bet $200 on a noon Sunday game. If they lost, they bet $400. No, they could bet. They still catch the afternoon. And if they lost, they bet $800. And then if they lost that, they needed money because the bookie came to town on Tuesday.
Sure.
So I'd float them a check. And that went really well, and I was making a ton of money until I had a fraternity brother from Kabul who was in to the bookie for about $4,500, which means he owed me $5. And it was actually Thanksgiving break. And so I kept calling him because I had to cover that check. And by this time, I had gone to a DU, and he'd given me cash. I had my own cash. I had a KD. She gave me cash. I kind of built a little bank. And I couldn't afford to lose $4,500 because I would have to allocate some of that to him. And so what happened was he said, well, meet me in Willow Springs. And we met at this truck stop, and it was his dad and his brothers, and they were gonna whoop on me. And I had a girl with me, and I said, okay, guys, you can whip me, but here's what I want to tell you. Do you know what your son's doing? And I'm more than willing to forego the $500 he owes me, but those guys from St. Charles, they will come to Kabul.
Exactly.
And they will hurt your son. And so they paid, and that was the end of my bookmaking lending business. That was enough.
That was enough.
Yeah, I was back to just doing the guy who needed date money. That was much safer. But I have to tell you this, the only reason why I had student loans was I borrowed money to do that. Yeah. I stopped on the way home at Christmas and got a $1,500 student loan at Great Southerns in Springfield.
Yeah.
And then I put that and I parlayed it. When I got out of college, I paid it off.
You just parlayed your student loan. I love it.
I loved it.
But the thing about your book, and I think that's why it's such a great title, the gray choice, because, people who, you're a very smart man, and I grew up with a very smart man, and it almost encourages you because when you are in that world of thinking and figuring out and pushing curiosity, all those things, if you're really smart, it pushes you into the gray area because it doesn't feel black and white. You're looking for solutions to something that can, it could actually work that way if I just did this or did that. So that's why your book's an interesting read, because you can see at different points in your life, Shaun, that it's an inspiring story because you are constantly doing what you need to do that a lot of other people aren't doing. But then when you get to that point, you're not completely satisfied. And that's that inner competitiveness or that drive that I think towards the end of your career of what you were doing in the banking business, you had kind of lost that because you had driven all the way to the top of the mountain and done all those things that was the thing that was your inner fuel. And then you had to figure out how to find that fuel again. But let's talk a little bit about how you got into the banking world, because like you said, your parents weren't pushing you into that.
No, not at all. And so it's the fall of my senior year, and I took the LSAT, And I had a professor, Walter Johnson, who was, and he might have been
Hey,
there when
Walter Johnson was there. Yeah.
a very, very, very famous man on that campus.
Yes.
And he said, Shaun, you should interview the bank. And I said, Dr. Johnson, I said, my parents really, not that I listened to them that much in a lot of ways, but that's one thing they would not really approve of. And he said, Shaun, the world is changing. And there's a book called The Bankers that actually references Mark Twain Bank out of St. Louis in those days. And he had me read that. And I said, he said, because it's becoming a sales culture. It's a different world. And now it's even different again.
Now it's different again, right?
Yeah, it's no fun again. But I had 3 priority interviews: IBM, Merrill Lynch, and UMB. And so UMB before the Nebraska
Missouri Bank. Yeah.
Before the Nebraska game, they were number 2 or something. We were like number 17, and we lost 7-6 on George Shorthose dropping the ball in the end zone.
Yeah.
That was the bad news. The good news was the day before, the president, a young guy, not unlike myself and your dad, a young guy from Southeast Missouri, was president at a very young age, like 37 or 8. Had grown up in a small town, played basketball at Mizzou, and he interviewed me, and so it went well. A few days later, I got a call, and they said, would you come to Kansas City on this Friday? Well, it happened to be the Friday before we went to play the Jayhawks. So I'm like, wow, this girl and I, we went there. I had an interview, had a weekend in Kansas City. And but I went in for the interview, and one of my teaching assistants from Corp Fin Finance 203 was there. And so when I got inside, they said, do you have any questions? Well, I had 2. The first question was, I'm trying to be on the ball. So I said,
Sure.
What's your best marketing? There's a table with everybody but the chairman of the board there. There's 6 or 8 men looking at you, and
Big interview.
right. And I'm thinking it's they're going to hit me with some question. They're going to go, being good conservative bankers. I said, okay, that one didn't go well. And a few years later, I found out, I have to digress and tell you, a few years later, they would ask girls who would come in, do you drive? It's because their wives didn't drive. There's generational things going on. Today, you get sued for that.
Sure you would.
But in those days, they thought that was...
HR would have a heyday with that.
Yes, they would. But I asked this question, too. I said, well, I saw one of my teaching assistants out there who was several years older getting his... And I said, do I need an MBA to get this job? And they said, no. And I've quoted this in many interviews with young people. We look for 2 things: maturity, and you've shown that, and people who've been successful in team sports. Because if you've been successful in team sports, you can make it in a big company.
It's the whole enterprise leasing theory.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's how I ended up in banking. But I will tell you one more thing. I moved us to Kansas City on the weekend of Labor Day, Memorial Day. And the 1st of June was a Tuesday. So that Sunday, I drove downtown to this big old bank building, and it said open like 9 to 3 or 4 or something. So the next day I got up, and I showed up at about 8:55 and walked in and walked through this door and went up to the 9th floor to HR. And first, I met the director of HR in about 6.5 seconds because I was late. I didn't realize that door time was for the customers. I was supposed to be there before 8, but that's how I started out, Brent.
That was the first day.
The first day.
So you kind of learned and had some mentors in that world, and I forget how long you were there before you took the opportunity to move to St. Louis. Can you kind of walk us through how that progressed?
Yeah, I started in June of 82, and I came to St. Louis in February of 84. But I figured out probably within a year, we were the biggest bank in Kansas City, and we were nothing in St. Louis.
Yeah,
and
got all the fancy stuff in Kansas City.
Yeah, we had. They had art. We had every Thomas Hart Benton and every George Caleb Bingham you could imagine. Just beautiful. In fact, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal.
And a beautiful dining room.
Beautiful dining. And for you didn't realize this because people tease me about being cost conscious, but you got. Remember, I'm single. You got soup, salad, main course, and dessert in your iced tea, which is for $2.20.
That was it.
That was it. But I wasn't an officer. And so after about 13 or 14 months, I'm looking around, I'm going, and I went into the vice chairman. I said, Mr. Huwalt, I think I need to be an officer. Well, in a few days, I was a loan administration officer, whatever that was. I was the only one in the company.
But you were an officer.
And I could go eat down there. And I was looking for how could if you know me well in life, I love food and I love to eat. So I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. But I knew early on I'd come to St. Louis because St. Louis, growing up on the Arkansas line, literally in the middle of the state, but you were St. Louis Cardinal focused.
Sure.
And we went to St. Louis a lot. My dad raced horses over there.
So it wasn't unfamiliar to you at all?
No, not at all. And so the opportunity came up. They said, you can stay in Kansas City, you can go to Springfield, or you can go to St. Louis. And I, of course, took the day and went to Springfield, met the guy, but that wasn't going to work. And I went to St. Louis, and they offered me a job, and so I showed up. a couple of months later. But St. Louis for UMB, and it was the same thing for St. Louis banks in Kansas City. But I'll never forget, because this was a great thing about the company I was with and the culture. Literally, after 12 months, I sat in meetings with the chairman and CEO. I mean, people say, how do you know about buying banks? I said, because when I was 22 and 23 years old, I sat in rooms and we bought
That's
banks.
what they were doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And your job was to man the phone and to be the runner, but you heard everything. And you literally heard everything.
Yeah.
And so
what an education.
It was a great education. But I was in my last meeting, and Mr. Kemper looked at me, and he said, and he had that gruff voice, he goes, Shaun, he goes, I hear you're going to St. Louis. And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, well, you know, we got good news finally. And he looks down at Jerry Rice, who had been at the bank I trained at, and then they moved him to the holding company. And he said, Jerry, we made what, $24,000 last month in St. Louis. And Jerry looked at him, and Jerry just had that look of an accountant of, no, Crosby, we made $24. And then Crosby, he kicked the floorboard through a Seville one time. He pounded and screamed. He was a wonderful guy, but he had a temper. And he just goes, well, why didn't we take one more person to lunch? We could have lost money for the 10th year in a row, because they had 4 banks, and this was before branch banking. And the downtown St. Louis bank lost money every month. And I got there just in time for it to get fun.
So obviously it was an opportunity, because the easy road, and I think this is why I think your story is interesting. The easy road would have been to stay in Kansas City, be around all the fancy stuff, silk stocking clientele, and move up the ladder.
Exactly.
That would have been the thing, the easy, sophisticated, cushy way to do it. And you did just the opposite. You went to a place where they were not known. You had to make your way as the new guy, and you weren't the guy that was from St. Louis, which is a big deal in St. Louis. You know, where you went to high school, everybody wants to ask that question. You were from Thayer, and you come into this world. How does it work?
Well, and this is what's interesting. You said exactly the things that I faced, but I was able to turn them the other way. I became at 24 years old, they kept sending me out as the face of the bank. And
at 24.
At 24.
Yeah.
And I looked at, just other than age, and if you went to the parking lot and saw that 83K car out there, you definitely knew it wasn't a banker. But
those were popular at the time, those K cars.
They were, Lee Iacocca. So they sent me to a event at the Casa Loma Ballroom for young St. Louis singles. And I was down there, and
down on Cherokee Street?
Down on Cherokee. Okay. It was a big deal. They had bands and dancing. And it was, what's funny is it became the crowd of people that I competed with and got to know, and my kids went to school with eventually. But I'm just, to them, a guy from Kansas City. And I may have been in St. Louis 10 days. But what was interesting was everybody was talking about what they were going to do for their 3rd grade reunion and where they went to high school. Well, I would say I went to Thayer High School. And I always had a little fun with them. I would go, they go, well, what kind of school? I said, well, it's kind of private. You had to live in a special place. And there were only 57 people in my graduating class. Well, they're thinking 57 people. But the irony in that, Brandon, you moved to St. Louis, is that we had an advantage because they couldn't put us in a box.
Yes.
If I would have said, I went to Vianney, they go, oh, he's from South County. And,
exactly. There was nowhere to put you.
Right, exactly. Or he went to the U High. He's a really bright Catholic kid.
The other thing I think, Shaun, that you used it. I always, I was at Old Warrison Country Club, and I always made the joke that I got in because I was the only person from Hickory Hills Junior High. Well, that was funny because they instead of being ashamed of it or not being able to fit it worked as something. And what you did is you worked it to your advantage, which is smart.
No, you're exactly right. And so the other thing that helped coming to St. Louis was when you're in banking, you have something everybody wants, money. But I found my early success actually going to the Jewish community because Landmark was somewhat considered the Jewish bank, and Mark Twain definitely was, but the other banks weren't. And so I could have early successes. And then we built on those successes, and then people would hear, well, you did this or you did that. And then, and this was a thing about, and it's true in any large company, but they knew me in Kansas City. And one time I got an $8 million loan approved in a day, which was unheard of at UMB.
Sure.
I mean, Crosby Kemper signed a house loan for $1,000. I 1 week as a management trainee presented 83 real estate loans to him. None of them were more than $50,000.
Wow.
I spent, and he would look at me and a funny story, and this is a Monette story down in your neck of the woods. I have 3 pictures. And he says, Shaun, what are these three pictures for? And I said, well, Mr. Kemper, I said, here's the deal. I said, this is the street showing you it's paved. And then there's this really nice ranch house, say early 60s. And I said, this is the house next door. And then I laid the third picture down. And this is a house that we owed $10,000 on. Well, what? We lent $10,000 on this? But that was it. So to get an $8 million deal in a culture like that was unheard of. And Mark Twain, who lost to us, because I ended up knowing the guy, he goes, how did you do that? I said, they trusted me. I was from Kansas City.
Yeah.
And had I not done that detour in Kansas City, I wouldn't have done well.
But Shaun, here's the thing I think I wanted to ask you, because after seeing how you went up through the ranks with UMB, coming over to St. Louis, and then as you start to become somebody with your own bank, it's because you became a different banker than what UMB was. And, they were proud of their conservative roots but you went after the contemporary way of growing a bank. And did you work off of that as that I learned this and I'm going to grow differently, or I learned this and I'm just going to create a whole different brand of a little piece of that, but all of this?
Well, I went to graduate school of banking at the University of Delaware, and my thesis was really plagiarizing Mark Twain. It was actually a bank out of New Jersey called National Community Bank, we did exactly what they did.
Okay. You followed that,
yeah,
and you duplicated that. I love that, because so many people that get into trying to grow a company, they think that they have to reinvent the wheel. And what I found growing a company was there was always something out there, if I looked hard enough, that I could copy and I could bring it back and implement it into our company. And that is the secret to growing a company. Getting something that's already out there, don't reinvent it, take it and then duplicate it.
Exactly. Being a I would say this. I'm a proud plagiarist, because it was just one of those things where it just worked. And but the thing that made us special was we had all these business people around us who wanted to be involved in a bank but couldn't.
Yeah.
For lots of reasons. They weren't, they weren't blue bloods, they weren't this, they weren't that. But they had so much knowledge about industry, and they constantly asked me the question, why do you all do this way? And before it was over, a lot of times we changed how we did things because they looked at it like, don't do things because that's the way you've always done them. And that was a unique thing in banking. And, everything that we did was just, and we turned the Kentucky Fried Chickens, a Hardee's into a bank. Yeah. We made more money at Westport Plaza off an ATM machine than out of the bank.
I love it.
Because, and I wanted, if you could have done this legally, but you couldn't do it technology-wise, I would have had, because what happened, there were so many bars out there in those days that you'd have people come at 5, and at 5 I would have gone to, it'd been $1 between 8 a.m. and $2, and then at 11 it would have been like $5, and at 1 a.m. they like 20. They want cash, but you could, the technology would let you do it. But no, it was a fun run.
Do you think, after reading the history of how you stepped, you didn't get the position you thought you should have gotten? Do you think that's what clicked and started the momentum of you thinking, I got to get out of here?
Yeah, it was. And if we were in a place you could see now, I normally then immediately take my head and bang it against the wall. And I said it took me 7 years to figure out my last name wasn't Kemper.
Yeah.
And I actually predicted the CEOs after I left, and they were all Kempers. And but the point was, when I didn't get what I thought I should have got, and quite honestly, Brent, I shouldn't have gotten it. I was not mature or old enough, as good as I thought.
It felt like you should have at the time, right?
And that's what matters. Right. But I went to all these men that I'd done business with. In those days, virtually every company that was of size was run by male. And I really was like, one, can I get in and buy one? Two, can I come in and help run it? Because they were older. And every one of them said, you should do a bank deal. But the year before, mine was 89, this was 88, 8 new banks started in St. Louis. And, it just, and they kept saying doing that. And then that's how and it was because of my original partner that we did a bank deal. And it was really, and I had no clue what I was getting into. I'll be honest with you. The one story that everybody jokes about, the movement of the cash.
Oh gosh, you've got to tell that. Well, first of all, you get this little bank in Cahokia. I don't remember what size town that is, but I'm not been to Cahokia. But it's a small bank, and you're 29.
29.
All right, you're 29. And you roll into town. You're the guy. You and I can't remember the name.
Cole, my original partner.
Yeah. So you've got to tell the story of what you did with this cash.
Well,
it's hard to believe.
Well, it tells you how stupid we were when you look back at it.
But you created culture with it.
We did, and I believe that in any business in life, it's all about culture. And I'm familiar with
that story becomes legend,
right? And you do those things, and over time as you grow, culture changes and things like that. But you have to have a core culture. So we buy this bank, and we don't know what we're doing. Now, this guy had been president of a bank. He was a very smart man, knew how to run one, but we just were wired differently. And we had $1,100,000 in cash. Mm-hmm. Now,
that came with a deal.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we paid for it, but you don't do anything with it, and it counts towards your reserve requirements when it's in your vault. Mm-hmm. But you don't earn interest on it unless it's at the Fed. Well, in those days, Fed funds were like, I want to say 9%. Mm-hmm. Today they're about 4. So 9% on $1 million is $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't know anything. Nobody tracked any of this stuff. We didn't know how much we could take out, but I will tell you, 10 years later, with 38 branches, I didn't have one that had more than 50,000 in it, and it had 50 or more in the ATM because you just learned how to run without cash. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is we decide we're going to take $750,000 and take it to the Fed. So I get on the phone and I call Brinks because that's who you called in those days. And they said, they had their system. Well, we can get to Cahokia, which, by the way, is a town of 2,000. Sounds familiar. On the Iowa line. Couldn't have gone any further, for distance. And they said, we'll be there next Thursday. It'll be $250. And I'm thinking, let me call you back. And I get off the phone. I go, we're not going to pay $250. What are they thinking? So literally, Brent, what were we thinking? We went out at an 89 Buick LeSabre. We loaded $750,000 of cash. It's not like you've seen a movie where, they got a briefcase.
Yeah.
These are 10s and 20s and 50s and 100s. Mm-hmm. That Buick.
You're styling in that Buick LeSabre with some money.
It's in the low ride position. I mean, if I'd have been on I-44, I would have been picked up for carrying marijuana. Because that's who they profile. Big cars with their trunks. Exactly. So I get in the car and I start driving back. And then as I look back at that, it was 168 miles, one way, virtually.
It rained.
Raining and 120 miles of 2-lane road.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what if I have an accident?
Yeah.
What if I get pulled over?
I mean, I can't even imagine what $750,000 even looks like in the flesh because it's a lot of money and it's heavy.
It is a lot of money and heavy. Now it gets crazier because after this story came out, I didn't even tell anybody this until recently. And my cousin, when I told him that, he goes, Shaun, he goes, why didn't you sleep in the car? I didn't think of that, Brent. Literally, my oldest son asked me that last night because I finally let him watch the video. So I take and we unload the money and we're thinking, okay, we lived in Ladue, which was nice.
Yeah.
But, you're not thinking about getting robbed.
Not everybody's got $750,000 on the floor of their living room. Yeah.
Well, we put it in the family room and we put blankets over it and then everybody sleeps
around it.
So if something goes wrong, we'll figure out what we're going to do. And then about 4 a.m, everybody gets up and you load it back in the car. And the funny part is you pull down on, you came in on 4th Street to the Fed. Well, at about 5:30 in the morning, there's like 20 Brinks trucks in a red Buick.
How old would your kids have been when they were loading that back?
Oh, no, they didn't help. That was the problem.
Okay.
I had one child, and he was going to be 2 the next
so
week.
He didn't help at all.
No. And in fact, last night was the first time he'd ever heard this story.
It's one of the craziest stories I've heard.
Yeah, but it's what it. That's,
and you saved $250. But what I love about this is because so much of sales is storytelling. So much of closing deals is storytelling. So much of building culture in a company is having a legendary story that becomes legend. And that is one of those type of stories because it says something about what triggered that in your brain was, we're not paying $250 for that.
Yeah.
We're not. But you lined your Buick up with the Brinks trucks down at the Fed.
They just
I don't even know I wonder if that's ever even happened before.
Probably not.
A Buick LeSabre lined up with the Brinks trucks at the Fed.
Well, after 9/11, I don't know they'd let you get in line.
They probably wouldn't let you,
especially when they saw it in the low ride. It'd have to be a bomb, But
exactly.
But no, you're right. Culture and culture is so important in everything in life.
Yeah.
But it's created by moments like that.
Yeah, moments like that. So you get going with this bank. Walk us through how this becomes Allegiant.
Well, we get going, and we'd been at it about 2 years, and we had a bad year in 91, and I had made a mistake, and made a lot of mistakes in my life, some really big ones, but I had raised over half the money. Actually, I met with everybody to raise it, but over half the money was from people I knew less than 5 years, and I went to probably 400 people the summer of '89. 89 people gave me $2,565,000.
That's some solid.
That's what we got selling. And so we're off to the races. But there were 9 board seats. And I took one, and there was an accountant who'd helped me introduce me to some people. And I took him. And the other 7 were friends of my partner.
Okay.
But, excuse me, a very entrepreneurial, dynamic man. He was chairman, and not then, but he became chairman. Mm-hmm. And he said, I want to take you to dinner. And we went to dinner, and he said, Shaun, this is not working. He said, you ought to be running the place. And I said, well, it's not going to happen because, okay, now the vote's 6-3. And he goes, I think you're selling yourself short. And Brent, I almost said this a while ago, but it's a better time to say this. I did operate my whole life in the gray. Mm-hmm. But what I did up until I got lost, I always went to lawyers, and I would say, if you're a lawyer, I'd say, Brent, I want to do this. Tell me how legally I can do it, and then I'll decide if it's worth the aggravation.
Yep.
So we went to this lawyer, and it cost $600 for about a 10-minute meeting, but it's the best $600 ever spent in our lives. He said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to draft a resolution, and you're going to put 9 names on it. And then you go to the ones who, obviously we're going to put his name on it, but you're not going to go to him. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And what we're going to do is we're going to have you get them to say at the next board meeting, and then we set this up for the board meeting was a week away. It was on a Wednesday. We met with him on a Monday. It was a small meeting, a different kind of meeting. And we're going to hand it to him and say, look, here's a copy. We've got 5. How many ever you've got? Well, we got 6. What the catch in that was, the gray was, a director can only vote in a meeting. A shareholder can give you a proxy.
Okay.
But that thing we gave him, it wasn't illegal in a law sense, a criminal law sense, but it wasn't worth the paper it was written on.
Right.
But the bluff paid off. And by operating that gray, well, he went to the meeting, immediately blew up, ran out of the room, went to one director. Now went from 6 to 3 to 5 to 4. We went to another one who'd hired him at Mark Twain, a woman who was a brilliant genius, could read people like I never knew in my life. She said, well, what did it took you all so long to do this? Of course, well, that was 6 to 3, and it was over. And so now then, I'm just turned 33, and I'm the CEO, and we were a $50 million bank. And this is something that people don't really realize. We grew 50-fold, Brent, in 9 years.
That's such growth.
We grew earnings 400-fold. And so it was like what
did it feel like?
It was a rocket ride. It was I want to stop and say this. When it came time to sell, I had no problems. It was time.
Yeah, you knew it.
We'd been together 15 years. It's like it had run its course. But those 10 years after we bought my partner out, 11 years, were just phenomenal.
Well, and you guys were known. I mean, you and I really never crossed paths. A couple of times, but you were known as the bank, that was on the rise, the bank that was making things happen. And that had to feel a certain way to you after all the different things that you'd been through, being on that rise, being in that power position, being in the know of a guy that had it going on in a city like St. Louis.
And it was a drug.
Yeah, it'd be a drug.
And and that's, the beginning of the end, and then in a lot of ways. But I have to digress here and talk about our paths crossing, because in 1986, your dad and you all lived on Ladue Road.
Yes.
I'm going to say Ladue Road.
Yeah.
And you banked at UMB. And, of course, I ran corporate banking then. And one of my bankers said, you need to go out to Ladue Road. We got to go look at this house. And so we go out there, and this gentleman, who turned out to be your dad, it's the only time I'd ever met him. And he said, I want to do this addition here, and I'm going to change the front of the house, and it's going to become Oakland.
Back of the house.
It was beautiful. It was brilliant. He changed the value because being 99 whatever Ladue Road was
9445 Ladue Road
was not good.
No,
but being 21 Oakley or 41
Oakley,
was like
changed
a whole
everything. Right,
totally. It was brilliant, and we talked about that for years. Even though I never saw your dad again. Then I played golf maybe a dozen times in my life.
Yeah.
And I have a family full of great golfers.
You do.
I'm not one of them. So my brother
pro golfers
belonged to St. Albans. And I'm out at St. Albans with a very prominent African-American lawyer, a minister who I can't think of his name right now, but was the African-American minister in this. If something happened in the city, he's long dead, was there. And my brother-in-law, we're playing golf. And my phone goes off, and it's a realtor. And he says, Shaun, he goes, I've got a house on Polo we can buy. And he goes, I know you're looking for your help your brother-in-law find a different house. So my brother-in-law ex-brother-in-law now, was very cost conscious.
Uh-huh.
And so there's a bidding war between you and my brother-in-law. He said, this Cassidy guy has got a lot of money, but you can pay for it.
I did not know this.
No, I know you didn't. Well, Michael couldn't get there. And you turned in a magnificent house. I never was privileged enough to come into it, but one of my son's best friends, she grew up next door to you almost.
Yeah.
And Margot.
Yeah.
And so anytime I drop off or go there, I think, oh, that Cassie made a great buy. Now, one more story.
That's
this one
crazy.
you don't know at all.
Okay. I didn't know that one.
No, well, this is even, and this one is bittersweet for both of us. Mm-hmm. And it's not about your dad yet. I won't go there, and that's when I'll get emotional because he was a wonderful man. But so it's 2008, and I had lost all this money in banking and real estate because I lost my edge, and it's time to leave National City. And I owned, at that time, probably like 5 or 6 or 7 office buildings, parts of in Clayton. So I knew I was going to move, but I didn't have any furniture. And you all were in receivership. And a partner of mine said, there's some beautiful furniture over there. And I love that building for a lot of reasons that
We did too.
we won't go into because we won't take the time, but just the St. Louis history of that building. And it was a landmark dining room up there, and I would go over there with Mr. Kling, who was a competitor, but treated me, he and Adam Aronson treated me unbelievably well as a competitor. But so the sale was like at 10 o'clock. So we put young guys in fire escapes, and there were 2 elevators, and we had young guys in the fire escape. So we were the first. No matter who went to go bid, we were first. And I went to your office, and I bought your entire office.
It was nice stuff.
It was, that partner's desk was unbelievable.
Yeah, I loved it.
And what the sad thing for me was, and my ex-wife now has the sofa.
Yeah.
You know, still was that we put it down in the kids area downstairs, and we love that sofa. She still has it. But your desk, when I got in all my legal troubles, I sold to a lawyer.
Isn't that something?
But that desk, I love to this
They
day.
had 1,000 wives, that desk.
Yeah. But that's how
That is a connection. Yeah, all the way through. So, Shaun, going through, this is bringing back a lot of different things. When you went through, and I think it's the part that's interesting in your book, you had this tremendous rise. You get involved with so many different people that are movers and shakers in the St. Louis community. You know it's time to sell. National City becomes the suitor, and you become a guy now that has, you sell it for $500 million. You're 44 years old, I believe. You've done it. What's going through your mind? Because I'm sure there was elation, that you had accomplished this gigantic goal. What were you thinking?
Here's where I made my mistake. One, it was time. I was ready. It was the right thing to do. And I'd bought so many banks along the way.
It was like a $2.5 billion bank, I think.
It was. Yeah, we were like one of the 5th largest. We were big.
I mean, it's a big bank.
Yeah. And by the way, you would never know it because I officed at 4323 North Grand.
Yeah. Oh, that was the other thing. You talked about the carpet that you got as a deal.
Oh, yeah. This is a National City story. And we get down at the end, and they said, the CEO, wonderful gentleman, says, Shaun, I'm waiting for the hammer to drop, because I would have tried to drop the hammer. And he says, he goes, we're done with due diligence and everything, and we want to go through this deal. But, and I'm thinking, here's the but we have to say your offices need a little sprucing up. Well, they did for 2 reasons. One, because our ended up being our 2nd largest shareholder by that time, and I was the 3rd. He was in the coatings business, and so he knew a lot about carpet. So we bought a trailer truckload of sea green.
There you go.
Seaweed green carpet, and that's what we put down. By the way, it was $1 a square yard. Well, now you buy by the square foot, so it'd be like 8 cents a square foot. But it didn't look good. But we would buy a bank rent, and after we get the deal signed, we'd go through furniture shopping. I would go through it like you'd be with me, one of the top guys, and I go, I want that picture, and you go, I want that sofa, I want this, because we didn't buy anything. We were scavengers, and that was the culture. Yeah. But what I learned along the way, and it's amazing, especially when I read the Wall Street Journal and I look at business, we're felons. Yeah. And we're branded. But honestly, I didn't buy a bank from anybody. And there's a lawyer who told me, he said, Shaun, virtually every businessman in America commits 3 felonies a day.
Yeah, there's a book on that.
Yeah, and I believe that. But these guys, you had to legally bribe them to sell you their company. They didn't care about their shareholders. I was at lunch one time with a mutual friend of ours, Don Davis, brought a guy that was a big shareholder in a small bank, and the other guy, they started the same time we did, and by this time we were 20 times their size. And the guy looked at me. He was actually from Springfield, now that I think about it.
Springfield.
Had moved on to ended up in St. Louis. And he looked at me at the end of lunch. He goes, I've really enjoyed meeting you. He said, but here's the deal, Shaun. 1/3 of my shareholders hate me. 1/3 of my shareholders love me, and 1/3 don't care. And until the 1/3 don't care, do something, it's the best job I've ever had.
Sounds like a politician.
And that's corporate America.
Yeah, yeah.
And so in our case, because I own so much stock, and I had a golden parachute, was a couple $1 million, and I was ready. It was just it wasn't about me. It was about doing the right thing for the shareholder. And I always felt like I could say that. But what I lost in that was, and I was powerful, and you had all this information. I still had some access to that, but I became seduced by the fact that this was the 8th largest bank in the country, and I was like number 100 of 7,000 or 8,000 holding companies, not individual banks. And I mean, when they wanted me to come to Cleveland, they sent a jet, a $20 million jet with 2 pilots, and picked me up, and I was home for dinner. I mean,
it's nice.
Yeah, it's very nice. But I lost. I didn't lose drive, but I lost the street smarts that fueled the drive. And then after 4 years, when it was time to leave, and I'd lost so much money, I had to make it back, and I ended up getting. I didn't realize, because I was so insulated, I didn't realize how bad the world was. I'd lost that street intelligence, and then I went back into it. And that's when just not only was everything going bad in my world, then everything I had dealt with was bad. And then what I didn't have was I didn't have the people around. What was nice about National City, it was an intellectual. I mean, people were so intelligent.
Sure.
I mean, a guy I was in a small group. They paid you $100,000 to take an executive management class in stock. And there were 4 people in my group, and one of them had been number 1 in his Harvard Law School class, went to McKinsey, and now he was like the 3rd highest guy in their retail division. I mean, you're talking brilliant men and women.
Alabama football team. Yeah.
Exactly. They got him 10 deep. People say they get a 5-star recruit. You don't understand.
Yeah.
They got 4 more behind him at tight end, and they got 8 tackles
Exactly.
like that. But the intellectual part was wonderful. But I that didn't work in the world I was going into. And my people had all gone their own way. And I'm very proud of the fact that about 10 of my guys 10 of my guys ended up being
You've got quite
presidents.
a tree of people that
Have
became
done well.
successful. Yeah.
But I couldn't put a band like that back together. And then this is what got me to prison, is I didn't have the resources, and I didn't take the time to always ask the lawyer, how can I do it legally? Or if I couldn't, then I would know. Because now I'm also thinking I'm smarter, but I'm also fighting fire after fire. And I didn't take any money, but I still committed a crime. I don't deny that at all. I tried to buy myself time. I thought, if I do this and I can make it, really, I only bought myself a year.
The time to get to here and to connect the dots to survive. Because at the time that kind of stuff was happening, there was the whole world of finance was in a different position than it was ever been, I guess, is what you'd say.
Right, and I
You
don't.
had the real estate crash, and then you had the Lehman Brothers. You had everything that was just a turn spiral.
The dominoes just started falling.
Yeah.
And I always say I made those decisions. I did it myself. I have no problem saying that. But it's amazing that I think I might have been the only banker in the country that went to prison. And, I dealt with the biggest banks in the country and all kinds of brokerage firms. And we used to joke about the Chinese wall, in an investment house. It's either 6 inches or 18 feet, depending on where they need it.
Yeah.
And I'm not limiting anybody. It's not that. It was me, but I was the one, and I deserved it.
So because you went through a series of acquisitions, as you describe in your book, again, putting together smaller banks. And as this is going on, the world's crumbling around. And do you think if you would have had your group that maybe those things would have been talked out differently, or do you think that was just the environment of the moment and things went as they did because?
I'll bifurcate it. We would have failed anyway.
Yeah.
Because the macroeconomics were just
that way.
There was a tidal wave would be a compliment.
Yes.
Would I have ended up in prison? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
Because I think I would have had people around me who would have checked me better.
Yeah.
And that might have saved me, but it might not have. I can't say that. And
well, let's talk about when things start, when your nightmare becomes real, that that you're going to get indicted. Because when you get indicted, of course, a lot of people believe indictment is conviction, but in the real world, it actually does become that. what is going on? How are you dealing with it? And can you walk us through when the nightmare begins, when you're going into your world of this is the end, I'm going to deal with it, and are they coming to get me?
Well, and I'll back up a little bit. So the crime I committed was in 2009. In the end of September of 2013, I was walking out of a board meeting of a club I was on, and my phone rang. It was a lawyer, not a criminal lawyer, but he dealt so much that the I'm sure this is in every city, but in St. Louis, the U.S. Attorney's Office is a leaky ship.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Shaun, and this has been going on. Actually, the FBI had showed up at my house like in April when I was out in California visiting my two sons in college, and I met with him in June, and we talked, and he came back and he goes, "You're okay. They're not going to indict you. They're passing.
They're passing on you."
And I was never really their target. That was my co-defendant, not because of me, because of his own actions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, okay, you take that.
That's huge.
And then about early December of 2015, the same man calls and says, "Shaun, they're back on you, and here's why." And they were still so on him that they'd turned somebody else. Well, now they were looking at stuff they weren't looking at before. And what I had done was the transaction that I had facilitated was through him. And truthfully, and I'm not saying it should have because I wouldn't be who I am today. Had it worked out, no one would ever know. It would just disappear because There wasn't money missing. And we just bought time.
Mm-hmm.
And but he was
Was it in a real estate deal?
Yeah, it was
and the bank approved the loan, but you were part of the real estate deal. And that's where the connection was.
You can't do that when you own the percentage.
Right.
It just sold and paid off like it should have.
Right. It never would have happened.
It would have been gone. What happened is because he was so buried, he just looked as I checked a box and then he forgot about it.
Yeah.
And it's on me, not him.
Yeah.
And so that came about through another guy getting investigated because of him who was part of that real estate transaction. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, he never even got indicted, which is fine. But that's how he got out. Mm-hmm. And then once they looked at that, then they had me. But ironically, I want to go forward over a year, actually 2 years. When I got indicted and we finally reached an agreement, I had to tell the feds, they had a room full of people, I had to tell them what the crime was. Mm. It was so complicated. Mm. So, but back to then. So I find out, and the week before Christmas, I go see Scott Rosenblum. Mm-hmm. And Scott has me in his office, and I talk to him, and he says, he just calls the U.S. attorney right there. You know, the secretary says, one moment. He says, "I'm sitting with Shaun Hayes. Is he going to get indicted?" He said, "Any day."
Any day.
So we hung up, and I said, "Scott," I said, "what do you want?" He said, $250,000. Excuse me. I said, by that point, I didn't have $250,000. I wasn't going to ask my family. So I suffered through Christmas, and the day after Christmas, I told my wife. And you've been down that path. And of all the things that have happened in this, it's what you've done to your family, mm-hmm. whether intentionally or unintentionally, mm-hmm. is the cost.
Yeah.
In fact, I said when I was in prison, they're only hurting my family. Mm-hmm. You know, this isn't that bad for me. But that obviously didn't go over well. And then you hit the depression. And
was she aware of any of it,
yes.
Shaun, at the time? So she was. She just didn't know when.
Well, and she never knew the crime. Still doesn't to this day. And she was a lawyer mm-hmm. who hadn't practiced law, but forget that the U.S. Attorney's Office leaky ship. It goes to every lawyer in town.
Sure.
So she's getting her own information outside of me. Mm-hmm. But
and your kids, what are the ages of the kids when this is coming down?
Let's see, 11 to 28.
Okay.
Then never told any of them anything, obviously. So in March, now 2 months go by, nothing happens. I get a criminal lawyer through a friend and through some friends, and we go down and meet with them, and we look at it, and it's an unbelievably complex case. Obviously, if a year and a half later, I had to tell him what I did. Mm-hmm. And we think, he says, Shaun, he goes, "You're going to get indicted." And he says, "You're going," but he says, "I feel good about court." And I even felt good about court at that point. And even though I told my wife, and she said, "Shaun, 97% of all people get convicted."
Right.
That get
indicted.
Yeah, get indicted, get convicted. Right. So you're toast. But so we met with the U.S. Assistant U.S. Attorney, and he said, "Now I'm going to tell my client to carry his passport so that he can turn himself in." Mm-hmm. So in mid-April, this is what's horrible about the government. I go to Jeff City. I own part of a healthcare company. To finish the go, we'd been investigated for something. We were totally cleared. The employee quit. Everything was good. I went down to pay the lawyer and to thank him and to swap some documents. And I came back to Chesterfield Valley to watch my youngest son play baseball. And when I get there, he's this number 2 hitter and the number leadoff hitter's up. I'm sitting there and all of a sudden I get tapped on the shoulder and there's an FBI agent who interviewed me a few years before. And he says, "Can you come with me?" And I turn the corner, there's like 6. And they didn't need to do that in front of my children.
That's horrible.
Then they took me to Jennings, to a holding place where I spent the night with a guy who had a son the same age. They thought I was Don Trump because I'm walking in a suit. And actually my belt, which was the best gift my wife ever gave me, got stolen that night. My Gucci, all my clothes got stolen amazingly.
Yeah.
And
Misplaced.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was security and cameras and an antique belt buckle. To this day, I'm angry about. The only thing I'm really angry about
is your belt buckle.
My belt buckle, because I wanted to give it to one of my sons. So I spent 18 days in jail because I had to prove, Brent, I wasn't a flight risk. Because now when they put you through your arraignment, my lawyer's like, "Well, you're going to get out," and they go, "Well, no, we found Mr. Hayes' passport on him, and it appears that he was in position to fly." Well, I wasn't going anywhere. I was doing what they told me.
Right.
But everything they do, they twist.
Sure.
And what people don't realize is, or most people don't realize is, there's your story and my story, and then the truth is in between.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying they're lying,
right,
but they don't
bits
tell
and
the
pieces.
whole story. Right. They tell what they want to tell. So I spent 18 days in the county jail.
It's a long time in the county jail.
Yeah, in St. Charles. But I'd seen enough movies. I did very well. Actually, they ended up calling me Kevin McHale because I played basketball. I was the oldest guy in a basketball court, and I was the only white guy.
Kevin McHale,
yeah. And
Boston Celtics.
Yeah, for you non-basketball fans. So I did that for 18 days, and then I went out on pretrial. And what I didn't have when I was on pretrial was one. I get out. I get out. I go to one of my partner's condo they gave me to live in. And I go up to take a shower. I've taken one every day, but now to take a shower. And the doorbell rings, and I go downstairs in the towel, and I get served with divorce papers.
Oh, man.
So my day isn't going real well. But what I didn't get from my lawyer, because he practiced criminal law, but it really isn't his forte, is I start off with a pretrial officer that doesn't care what I do, and I end up one that cares about everything about 6 months in. And
that can happen. It's very common.
Oh yeah, they change like the day change.
Just had a conversation the other day with somebody that had that happen to them.
So almost a year to the day from when I was arrested the first time, I go down. They said, "You need to come in," which you saw them once a month. And a few times I'd gone down. I go down there, and then I sit down, and then 2 U.S. Marshals come in and cut the arm down. "You're under arrest." I get arraigned.
You're on pretrial at this point.
I get arraigned a couple hours later, and actually that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because when I get to the rest of the story, you'll figure out why. But part of it was,
it doesn't sound good.
No, it's good because I was chewing up time.
Okay.
You're every those 18 days counted, which I didn't know.
Okay.
At that point, and from the time they arrested me in April of 17, started counting, but they didn't talk to me until Thanksgiving. So I sat 7 months in a county.
And why did they arrest you? They said you were violating the terms of your supervision or your pretrial. Which would have been things that were business things.
Well, and what they said is that I had a friend that was a very good friend, been dead a long time, and he said, "When you don't have a job, you're a consultant." So I said I was a consultant. Right. Well, they want you to have a 40-hour, 30-hour job.
Not a consulting job, right. Don't want you to be working independently or be a consultant, right.
And they, like they always do, a woman, and I, by the way,
so it probably wasn't a problem with one of the probation officers, but it was a turn in. We're going to put him in the county jail on the other one.
Exactly. And here's the best story is I had quit banking, not because I quit because I was tired.
Yeah.
Then a few years later, like 3 years later, I got banned, which was fine. I didn't care by then. I didn't care when I quit.
Right. You were over with that.
A lifelong friend had sent me an email with her mortgage payment. And she said, "Should I well, she called me one day and said, 'Shaun, should I refinance?' I said, 'I don't know.' I said, 'I need to know your interest rate and how much you owe, because if you don't owe but $80,000, it isn't worth it. Right. And if your interest rate's 4%, it isn't worth it.' Right. She emailed me her bill. That meant I was in the banking business.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you can just,
again. Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I understand.
Yeah, and then they can do that. That's fair game, and I was stupid enough to have it.
How long did you live in the county jail?
Well, I spent the first 7 months. You had no communication from the U.S. attorney. Nothing.
You're just in.
I'm just in, and I did not.
What is your attorney saying?
Well, they're it's everybody stalling. It's the game that they play, and so what happens along the way is that I get bond reinstatement denied and all that. By the way, that was on the internet before I got told, but my ex-wife got to tell me on the phone, you're going to get denied.
You're not getting out.
I don't even get to go to court yet to get denied. I'm denied. And which again, it ends up being okay. But so finally around Thanksgiving, they say we want to negotiate. And the reason why there was a hearing in early December, and it was to bifurcate my trial from my co-defendant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he had done a contract for deeds on houses. You're in the real estate business, you understand that. And he wouldn't pay the bank. 212 families were losing their homes because of him. And my lawyer said, here's what's going to happen.
So he took the money and didn't pay the bank?
Exactly.
Okay.
And he said, here's what's going to happen, Shaun. If the trial gets bifurcated, your case is so complicated, you're probably going to win.
Okay.
He said, but if you sit there and they bring 212 families in here,
you're in trouble.
You're dead because you're at the same table.
Exactly.
They didn't bifurcate the trial, so I had to plead guilty. I was guilty, but you're willing to gamble when you got a high probability possible.
Sure.
And he said, not only that, but you'll get at least 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's the minimum.
It's a long time.
So we started negotiating, and finally cut a deal at the end of the year. And but I was supposed to get sentenced in April, then it became May. Finally, at the end of May, I got sentenced. But here's the kind of thing. Again, my lawyer, me not wanting to bother him because it was only $30,000. And two, I thought that he's 46 months. Now, there's a category of 37 to 46 months. Mm-hmm. And then the next one's like 47 to 54 or something like that. You've seen those sheets, I know. Well, I'm thinking I'm in the 37 to 46 months. Mm-hmm. So on May 23rd of 2017, then 13 months in the county
13
jail.
Months in the county jail.
And a month before, so I've got 14 months in county jail.
And you're in Warren County Jail, which I was at, and that is not good.
Well, as I told people.
It's a hard way to live.
It is a hard way. The worst thing is it's made for 24 people.
Yeah.
There's 36. A guy sleeps on a floor
in
a plastic thing. And when somebody gets up at night to go to the bathroom, they have to be at the other end.
It's right there.
Right there with them. And not only that, I didn't go outside
for 14 months.
14 months. You can't go outside. And when you go to jail, you go from one port to another port. You never go outside.
Right. Always shackled.
But the people there were very nice. Oh, I never went to court. But this the other thing is I never went to court. When I got to prison, all these people said, you've been handcuffed? Mm-hmm. I said, I never went to court. I wasn't shackled. Mm-hmm. And they go, well, we didn't have that. 90% of the white-collar people I met in prison have never been handcuffed.
I was shocked about the shackling because I went through that for the civil trial, and they took me where you explained in your book the bowels of the Eagleton building, which nobody knows about unless you're brought in the way we were brought in. But, that shackling thing, there's nothing more dehumanizing than that.
Oh, and it got to be, by the time I've been there so long, at the end, they used to take your handcuffs off, but by the end, there'd been so many fights. Yeah. They kept you shackled. And you would be in there from 6, 7 a.m., till 4 or 5 p.m. Yeah. And then you got to ride an hour and shackled in an uncomfortable position.
That's not good.
But all that stuff, again, I could deal with because I dealt with Warren County Jail like high school, a small town high school. We had fed people, we had state people, and we had county people. Mm-hmm. You never sat down to eat because you had to be ready to fight. Mm-hmm. So you ate your food standing up. Any moment, there's a fist fight. There's one every day. Yep. Usually over the drink, the drink,
TV,
the TV. There's, I finally, after about 90 days there, and one African American friend of mine beating 2 other, I got to control the TV on Saturdays between like 8 a.m.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, till 1, and then a few months later, I got to control it from 8 to 1 every day. And I have to tell you a funny story. The TV stayed on 24 hours a day on 100, the highest level could be. So you couldn't think anywhere. Forget the noise out there. But all night long, the TV would play.
Really loud.
Yeah, really loud.
And really high up.
Really high. But one night, the guy who controlled the flipper for a few minutes put it on a channel. And I don't know what happened to the show I was watching, but it played Mayberry, Our Randy Griffin, from 11 p.m. till 8 a.m.
Oh, wow.
It was hilarious because that didn't go over well with my.
Sure did.
But no, there was a fight every day over something, and you just get through that. But it got to
But
where
you adapted. I think that's one of the things that you learn when you're going through this whole thing, because you've gone from being the most powerful guy in the banking business to selling out to living the life, being picked up in private jets, and now you are wondering how you're going to turn the channel on the TV because the guy's got the clicker and there's a fight every day, and it's a different world that you can adapt to.
Yes.
That's what's interesting. Yeah. People think that, well, I always say nothing is as bad as your mind makes it out to be, not even prison. Now, jail is, it's almost as bad as your mind can make it out to be, but your mind can build up so many different things that stop you from doing things in life.
Right.
And if people would just know that it's going to be all right because you can adapt to it.
Absolutely. That is so well said. And that's the whole experience. And I self-punish myself in this regard. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize this because I hadn't been in this situation, but everything's about commissary in jail and in prison.
Yeah, yeah.
In the 15 months total I spent, you know how much money I had in commissary? Zero.
Yeah.
I wouldn't let anybody send me any money because I thought it was a horrible thing anyway. Mm-hmm. But I watched these guys who, didn't have anything take money from their family who didn't have anything to have something.
Yeah, yeah.
And I got stuff because they call me Google.
Yeah.
They needed an answer. They came
you
to me.
put that in the book.
And so they come to me. They need an answer. One morning, it's like 2 a.m. I'm sound asleep, and they can't get out, but they scream loud enough that they wake up one of my cellmates that they go to the door.
They called you Google and Podfather.
Podfather, yep. Yeah. And literally, we had the Godfather who killed 3 people for real, and he could have got 10 years. Instead, he went to trial and got like 400.
There you go.
But no, and they asked, like, how many home runs did somebody hit? And I answered the question. I went back to, the next day I get soups, and I never needed anything.
You got that. You got it from working your system, and you got respect in the system. Okay, so you finally, Shaun, you get out of this horrible environment to go to prison.
Yep.
And I'm sure you probably knew that prison was going to be better because there were probably people telling you in that pod that this is really, really bad.
This is the worst place on earth.
Yeah, but you will have a place that you could live that will be prison, but it won't be like this. Walk me through. You finally get to Marion. You're on a bus with a bunch of people. They drop you off. As you explain it, what happens? Well,
I ride a bus from the Mid-America Airport, which, by the way, that's where everybody has an AR-15. It's Con Air lands.
Yes.
But I don't know what I'm doing, but nobody tells you. Finally, I figured out, I said, am I getting on that bus? Because they say it was this old snub-nosed bus. There's guys with guns and rifles, and I get on there. I'm the only non-sex offender on the bus.
Oh, no.
Which is a whole nother story.
Yeah, that's a whole nother level of discomfort.
Those people are, we're chained, but they're like, some of them are really chained. Mm-hmm. So we stop in Marion, and we pull in front of the prison. And they get out, and they say, Hayes, come here. They uncuff me, they unshackle me, and they said, okay. And I'm standing there, and I'm like, wow. And it's sun. It was the first day of summer.
I can't imagine.
I'm like, I can't believe it.
Over a year, you haven't been out in the sun.
And all of a sudden, a Dodge minivan pulls up, and it's a guy, which scared me to death because how he drove that little distance on the wrong side of the road going 40 miles an hour when it should have been 15. And we go across to the prison, and we get there, he goes, get out. And I get out, and out in front, there's like 6 or 7 guys who turned themselves in that day.
Okay. Voluntarily surrendered, right.
Yeah. They got to drive in. It's like a guy came in when I was there the second time, and he said, I rented an Enterprise car in Chicago and drove down. He was there for securities fraud. And he said, I stopped at Enterprise, and this young man comes out and says, can I help you, sir? He goes, well, he goes, where can I take you? And he goes, I need to go to prison. He goes, what prison? He goes, there's like 2,200 men down there. And this kid was like, he goes, don't worry, I didn't kill anybody because this kid was scared to death. It's a funny story. So I walk in, and this is where I won't get emotional because I've had a chance to prepare for this, but an Asian man who's an orderly for the secretary looks at me and he goes, you're Hayes. And I said, yes, sir. He goes, Cassidy wants to tell you everything's good. Now, I had met your dad one time, 30 plus years before, in a driveway for 10 minutes. And it was just like the world changed. And so they take you in and they give you this stuff. And I go down to the dorm because I called Marion a bad summer camp.
Yeah.
And he had already planned, and I had this great bunk in the right part of the area against the wall and everything. I had all kinds of stuff, and you all don't realize what stuff is.
Get set up.
Yeah, everything's set up for me. And all of a sudden, it's time to line up to go eat. And so, they dismiss us. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, at least I'll get chow hoof, which the food there was very good. It had to be. But he goes, oh, no, Shaun, we're not going there. And so we walked by. We walked clear across and went outside twice to the gym. And there's a table. And we had steaks and baked potatoes. And it wasn't, do you want salad dressing? Do you want French? Or do you want Thousand Island? Do you want vinaigrette? And we ate. And the next night, we went over and we had steak fajitas because the steaks they didn't feed us that night.
Ate like kings.
And by the way, this was all prepared by inmates.
Yeah.
And your dad could not have been more gracious. We must have walked 1,000 miles in the months we were there, and had so many things in common. He loves you and your daughters and your brother more than anything in the world. And finally, after we both ended up in Pensacola, I'm going forward for a reason. He just broke down one day and just told me everything. And he was so brokenhearted. Mm-hmm. And I know he just wanted you all to know how much he loved you and how sorry he was. But he was a wonderful man. And we had a ton of fun together.
I can't imagine the two of you, because eventually I think you shared space, a bunk bed, and two guys from Thayer that had kind of conquered the world, and there you were.
Well, after 6 weeks, what I said, he goes, now my guy is leaving. Trey was his name. He sunbathed all day. That was Trey's name. Yeah. He said, when Trey leaves, you're moving over here. And I gave up position, but not really.
Yeah.
I didn't care. By then I'd figured it all out. And we had a great time. And we talked politics and religion and finance.
And I think that's the thing that's really, I had a couple of guys like that. And that really does help your time. And they call it your car, the 3 or 4 people that you hang out with, but walking and sharing books and being able to carry conversation and talk, feel like you is really what it is. You don't, because that was always my thought, more scared that I was going to lose me and going to prison. And the more you do what you and Dad did, you were being yourselves. You were in prison, but you were talking to the world.
And by the way, your dad was afraid of no one. And it wasn't, you didn't need to be in fear there. It wasn't like county jail.
Yeah.
But he'd had a few run-ins. But, and this is a story I've never told anyone either. Yeah. But so it's August. I'd been there for a couple of months. And I never watched TV. Because I had to watch TV. I didn't watch TV at home, so why am I going to watch it there? And so my nephew is in a golf tournament. And he's in really good position. And a TV there are kind of owned by certain groups, as you know, and people put their pillows in a chair. If you ask what chair you're going to sit in.
You can't sit in somebody's space.
Right. And I didn't want the aggravation. Or
right.
So, but all of a sudden, it's Sunday afternoon. It's about 4:00, and it's looking good. So I go down to the one TV that never leaves CNN. Now, there's like 20 of them, but and I go down there, and your dad's right behind me because he loved golf. Mm-hmm. And I said, we're going to change TV. And Doug goes, his nephew's going to win a golf tournament right now, and we're changing TV, and nobody's going to. And I mean, literally, he just took, and everybody's like, okay, Doug. Now, of course, they're all 30 years younger or 40 years younger, and 50 pounds heavier.
He's an OG.
But we turned the TV on, we watched, and he won. It was a wonderful. And by that time, we had like 30 people cheering.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Most of them had never seen golf, but it was fun. And he just did those kind of things. He was wonderful. And we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner together for 8 months, and then I met him in Pensacola.
And then you guys both went to Pensacola for the RDAP program, which, as you explain it, I think, because there's a lot of different opinions on RDAP. I have my own, and I feel like there's some very good things that come out of it. I even think that maybe it's rational behavioral thinking is what it is, and I almost think you should teach it in high school.
I said middle school. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It changed me in this regard. I've always been a fast thinker, and that plays well. But now you know this term, I think about my thinking. I do it just as fast.
Sure.
But then I'll think about it.
Yeah.
And it should be taught in middle school, high school, because it's the only thing that I experienced in prison that was of any value.
Exactly. That was my point. Out of all the things, that has some value to it.
Yeah,
it does. And it's, it depends on who it's taught by, who the people are and all that, and how the programs run. It's pretty much like a cult that you get into with RDEP, but I didn't mind it.
cult would be an understatement where I was. I mean, and of course your dad comes down, and now then I'm the OG because I'd been there for a month before he got here.
Yeah.
And at first day I went, I'm like, oh my God, they got these chants, they got this stuff, and you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, and your bed.
It's a prison inside a prison.
Oh, and by the way, you know, I don't know if it was the way in Leavenworth. We never slept. You slept on top of your bunk.
Oh gosh, yeah.
You can. I mean,
you can get in your sheets.
Yeah, you can get anything. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I hear I'm finally in the military, and so that's it. But you mentioned something about my journey earlier, and we talked about county jail, stuff like that. But and you have this in your genes, and it's in your blood, and it's in your DNA, as we would say today. I had a secretary in 1983. She worked for the vice chairman, but because I sat outside of his office, I used her. Mm-hmm. And you were always in trouble there. It was very volatile. It was a family business. Mm-hmm. Might have been a public company. It was a family business.
Yeah.
And in those days, we had copiers the size of this room. And I would go to the copy room at night because I had to prepare my own stuff. And Peggy came in one night, and she was probably 16. She said to me, Shaun, she goes, I want to tell you something. She goes, I've been here 40 years. And she said, I've seen people come and people go. She goes, you're going to be up in life and you're going to be down. But you're cream will always rise to the top. And I've felt that with me now for 39 years from when Peggy told me. But the week before I was sentenced, I got a letter from my older nephew. I only have two. And it like 6, 7 sentences. But the crux of it was, Shaun, you've had an unbelievable rise. And a lot of people love that. Mm-hmm. You've had a horrific fall, and all kinds of people love that. Mm-hmm. But you will be back. And that's what they really love. And I have that letter.
Oh, I love that.
That I carry around. It's actually in my car in a file, and I have a picture on my phone. But that's what, and it was actually.
People like a good comeback, you know. And you went through some tough times and health crisis. You know, you not only had issues with the family and that, but you also had a health crisis. What was that like in prison?
Well, by the way, there is no health care. And in fact, I just 2 weeks ago met with a dentist because there's no dental care. There's no nothing.
Right.
And but the only thing that saved me, we almost got to this point in the story before, but I'll get you there quicker. I went back to Marion to wait my last 4 months. I didn't get out 1 hour early because of COVID or anything like that. Forget what the newspaper says because they're horrifically inaccurate and have been forever. But when I was in Marion, I spent 10 days in February and 8 days in March in the hospital, a lot of it intensive care. Mm. And they took great care of me, good people. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. But when I was back there in February, the doctor would come back the 1st of April. And he says, you're really sick. And I said, I know that. But I said, here's the deal. I said, if you don't let me out of here, they won't let me out of prison on May 5th. Mm-hmm. And so he said, I'm going to let you out. And I got out, and I took life slow enough that it wasn't until Easter Sunday of 21 when I got home from church and I went to go up the stairs, and I could barely make it. And my then ex-wife called me, and became very compassionate. Said, you sound like you're going to die. And I said, I'm going to BJC in the morning at 9 o'clock. I'm really sick. Mm-hmm. And I got there at 9:04, and I stayed 5 days, and I had lymphoma was back. I'd had it literally 10 years before. Mm-hmm. And by October, I'd beaten that. But you don't have an immune system, and I'd had that. And then about Thanksgiving of last year, I got an infection in a finger, and then it turned into pneumonia. And I didn't realize it.
You could die with pneumonia without it, yeah.
And I didn't realize
without
it.
An immune system.
But my friends said and so many people, Don and Jim and Jeff brought me food and stuff. I did all kinds of. But the bottom line was, they said, Jeff said, I thought you were going to die. That's why I was so nice. Mm. He was kidding me, but it was true. And then finally, I got to this March, and I said, I got to live. Mm. And I've been back. To live. And in the meantime, what that did for me, and this is the amazing thing. One, and I want to come back to people in a second, but I started dictating my book on an iPad in February. Mm. And I have a ghostwriter who's written several successful books under his own name and ghostwritten some great books. Then every Friday for 2 hours, we'd go through what I sent him. Mm-hmm. And after almost 5 months of that, we had a book. And but that time down I spent to do that, and I slept, but I would do that. But what I've learned in this, I want to back up, because that Thanksgiving a year ago, I called a guy that I had seen at the airport a lot, seen him at events in St. Louis, Shep Hyken.
Love Shep Hyken.
Absolutely. And we had paid him in the fall of '98, in October. We paid him $5,000. That's how cheap he was, to come out and speak to our group in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And he did a wonderful job. And I knew his brother through a club we belonged to, and I would. But we just we're not friends, but we passed. And I called Shep up, and he couldn't have been more gracious. And then I said, I'm going to do this. I said, and in 2015, right when after I knew I was going to get indicted, I called a woman in Dallas, and she said, Shaun, write a book, and you have a speaking career. And I said, I'm not that interesting. And by 18, I convinced myself, I've read a lot of those books.
Yeah.
It might be
interesting. I might be interesting.
It might be. I don't know that it is, and you've been very gracious with your comments, but the point is, I knew I was going to do that.
Yeah.
And then I got out and was sick, and then I got to that point where I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my drive now is, and I know you've done this because I followed you, you've got that goal out there, and I can see the goal. And so I'm after the goal, and it's the same. I joke I'm a shadow of my former self, but not really.
Yeah.
And so I've had all these wonderful experiences, and what I say in my dedication of my book is, I want you to experience the highs, but I hope anyone who reads this never experiences lows, and that they learn from those things. But the point I wanted to make was the way Shep treated me.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have, yet so many other people have just been whatever you want to put a moniker on it. I won't.
Yeah.
And the other thing is how many people will say something to you and say, oh, I'm going to do this or that. And I know they're not. They're just trying to, in the moment, try to say something, trying to get away from. I don't care. See, that's a beautiful thing about the road we went down. The way I used to think, all those things that used to be important to me, I don't even care about anymore.
Yeah.
And I am the most free man. I'm happy.
Yeah.
I'm very content. I'm not complacent.
Right.
There are things there's things I want. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is there anything I need? No.
Yeah.
And I look at life so differently.
I think that one of the unbelievably great things that can happen when you've gone and you've hit rock bottom and you felt it, and you kind of find your soul when that happens, because a lot of people think hitting rock bottom is the end, and I think hitting rock bottom can be a new beginning to find your passion again. And I think what I get excited about with your story, Shaun, is that you have been through such a journey, and it's what has made you who you are. And now you're going to go out and share that with people, and you're going to be able to help people. You're going to be, I've seen the videos you sent me. You're a great storyteller, and you're going to be able to help people that are in the big corporate office, and you're going to be able to help people that are the startup guys that are looking for that push, that confidence, whatever that is that gets you through that up and around and over your fears. That's what you have. You have that ingredient. And I wanted to ask you to kind of wrap this up. Being and living from the boy from Thayer to where you are today, what do you think is your biggest takeaway to the listeners out there?
I think life is about perseverance. It's never give up.
Never give up.
And I watch so many people in so many ways in life, whether it's little things or big things, they give up.
Mm-hmm.
And they forget they have a dream, or they don't pursue it. And you just can't give up. And by the way, in 2008 and 2009, when I thought it couldn't get any worse, something good would happen in the morning. We'd say, go home right now, let's lock up, because it can only get worse. But as bad as you think it is, one, it can be worse.
It can be worse.
But two, and you can realize those worst fears, I love the intro to your show, but at the end is, if you don't quit, you're going to win.
Yeah.
And that's all I can say.
And that is such a great, because that's how you've lived your life. And if you don't quit, you will win, because you'll keep stepping, and whatever you step, you get more confidence. And when you get more confidence, you find solutions, and then that gets you to the next step. Great stuff, Shaun. I really appreciate you coming in today, sharing your story. I love your book. For those, it's February 7th, right?
Yes, sir.
For those looking for a speaker out there, this guy's got all that wisdom, and he's willing to share it. So, what's the best way to get a hold of you, Shaun? Because I know you got a new website.
Yeah, ShaunHayes.com or Shaun.
And you spell it SHAUN.
Yes, sir. I actually joke when sometimes I'll get somebody, I'll go, how do you spell your name? I go, you're going to be Shaun who spells his name wrong.
Yeah, right. And I spell Cassidy wrong. I
do know that. I made that mistake, and I was quickly corrected by your father. But no, it's SHAUN, Hayes.com. And
it's a great website, and you can I don't know if whenever you'll be able to pre-order, but you'll want to check this book out. talking about books, I've got one too, Nightmare Success. And you can pick it up at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. And everybody who loved the likes on social, follow the show too. Go down and hit those buttons either on Spotify. You can hit the bell. On Apple, you hit the little three dots in the corner there, and it'll say follow. Leave me a message, BrentCassidy.com. I love that. Love to go back and forth with the listeners, sharing back and forth. Edovo, I'm in 200 prisons now, just in the last couple of weeks. I'm really excited about that. I'm going to start having in the show notes for you guys to be able to contact me back and forth so we can have a conversation. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Nightmare Success in and out. Shaun Hayes, thank you.
Thank you, Brent.